Hello guys, Oscar Hotel 8 Sierra Tango November here from Survival Tech Nord. You are watching an episode of the X Days Off-Grid series. This series is designed to be a full-on field test for the gear, the projects, and the concepts you've seen right here on the OH8STN YouTube channel. Now it's all in good fun, but I'd like to consider this series as a sort of hater fact check. So not only am I going to try to tell a good story, we're going to take what we've learned right here on the channel out to the field and put it to the test. In this episode, we're going to hike 13 kilometers to our camp. We're going to set up camp, set up the field station, do what needs to be done, then hike another 13 kilometers back to our pickup point. 3 days, 2 nights. It's a little different than what we're used to on this channel, but stick with me and I'll tell you all about it.
You are listening to the Emergency Broadcast Systems. This station broadcasts emergency news and official information on the air for a assigned area.
We start this episode with a 13-kilometer hike, pulling the hiking trailer with all of our camping gear and the entire solar-powered field station. So that's the Yaesu FT-891 Raspberry Pi and power source, the PowerFilm 120 watt and 20 watt panels, the Nortent TP6, 4 days of dehydrated food, 7 liters of fresh water, my sleep system, and my cook system. Of course, I also carried YouTube gear, so you could watch this video. If I had to pick one single enabler for this trip, it would have to be the hiking trailer. Now, perhaps 20 or 30 years ago as a younger man, I would have been willing to carry this amount of gear on my back. These days, I consider the hiking trailer a smarter way to move my gear to where it needs to be. It just makes sense. So the hiking trailer not only allowed me to carry a larger loadout, it allowed me to carry that loadout for much further than I would have if it were on my back.
It would be safe to say the only thing I've seen along this road about the past hour and a half is a reindeer.
Other than the rain, the hike was pretty uneventful, and the most difficult parts were the uphill portions and of course the final push to the summit. The graphics up on the screen are the stats from my heart rate monitor and GPS. So as you see, even though my heart rate got up there from time to time, I was still having a pretty easy go of it. As a side note, preparedness and emergency communications are as much about capability as they are about fitness. And here we are at the summit. The very first thing I did was set up the teepee tent and take this panoramic view. It's a beautiful location at about 315 meters above sea level. Apologies for the crazy exposure of this photo and the last clip, but there are better ones coming up in the video. So here's the base camp, and as you can see, I went ahead and set up the PowerFilm FM16-7200. This is my primary solar generator for the camp. And naturally, it supplies power to my radio, but it also supplies power to my YouTube gear and to the lighting inside the teepee. The PowerFilm FM16-7200 feeds its power to the Geneson charge controller. The Geneson charge controller in turn manages the 10 amp hour lithium iron phosphate pack we built on the channel. For emergencies or when I want to recharge on the go, I deploy the 20 watt panel in parallel or on the trailer to charge and go. When I use it in the base camp, I put both panels in parallel to a single Geneson charge controller. It should be absolutely no surprise that I eat, sleep, and operate from the Nortent TP6. Now this is the 6-man version of the TP, and you may remember from my solar-powered field station video, the idea was to house 2 operators and all their gear. Now I am completely alone on this trip, but it doesn't matter. The TP6 is actually light enough that I can manage the weight on my own. In this configuration, I deployed the ground sheet in the vestibule and the inner tent, which has 2 areas for sleeping. My radio gear is generally set up on one side or the other of the vestibule. Inside the inner tent is where I sleep. During the summer months, I'll also cook and have coffee there. Sorry for the mess. I didn't plan on having any visitors. There certainly are things to be passionate about with this field station, but I'm extremely happy with how the comms gear turned out. Now, it should be no surprise that I deployed the Yaesu FT-891. Now, I still think this is a magnificent radio and it was well worth the money. For digital communications, I used a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus with a Pi Juice hat for the real-time clock and battery backup. Primary time for the Raspberry Pi was maintained with a U-Blox USB GPS, allowing time from the GPS satellites to be used as an NTP time source. This configuration offered some redundancy as primary time was from the GPS and backup from the Pi Juice hat. Audio and push-to-talk handling between the Raspberry Pi and the 891 were handled by the ZLP Mini Pro SC audio interface. Now, I like how all of these components work as an integrated system as a part of the radio, but in the future I'll gut the Raspberry Pi, I'll gut the audio interface, add a set of batteries, and mount them in their own enclosure to the frame of the radio. Now, one of the most popular questions coming in is, am I powering the station with Android? Well, the answer is kind of yes and no. I set up an access point on the Raspberry Pi to mimic a Wi-Fi network. We then use VNC Client on the Android tablet to access the Raspberry Pi and its apps. You'll find lots of information and tutorials on the Raspberry Pi and the 891 in the episode notes. For this trip, I decided to use the Chameleon MCOM 3 Portable. It offers reasonable multiband performance and is completely waterproof. We can also send out a huge thanks to John, November 0 Joliet Delta Sierra, who sent this LDG Z100 Plus in a custom case. I did do some SSB work while I was up on the summit. The most memorable of those contacts was with Italy Bravo 1, Delta Charlie India stroke Papa. He was also a portable station, and although we had lots of QRM, it was a solid contact between us. Now, nothing ever goes as planned, but it was a good opportunity to promote amateur radio. To my surprise, there was a group of high school students camping at a lavu not far from my own camp. Now, I'm almost certain she really wasn't interested, but the students seemed to be, so the teacher asked me if I would demonstrate what I was doing with the radio gear. To be fair, SSB work is fun and a necessary skill, but I wasn't there for casual communications. In fact, part of the reason for me being on this expedition was to test out a new utility mode. That mode is called FT8 Call. Now, before you guys start burning torches and getting the mob together to come and get me, there's a huge difference between FT8 and FT8 Call. And that difference is keyboard-to-keyboard chat. We don't have the free text limitations as we do in WSJTX under FT8. With FT8 Call, the whole point is to take advantage of the weak signal messaging of FT8, but extend that to a slow but efficient messaging mode in the form of keyboard-to-keyboard chat for low-power stations in the field. I decided to put FT8 Call to the test by using it to send my sit reps to operators who were following my progress in the field. Those sit reps included weather statistics I was collecting, it included my battery levels, and it included health and welfare. Now, once again, our buddy Mark, Mike 0 India Alpha X-Ray in the south of the UK, lends a hand to collect this sit rep from me, which he then forwards out to social media. For this sit rep, I give Mark a short weather report and I tell him the condition of my batteries. Once I finish my message, FT8 Call will automatically send it out in the right sequence and recompile that on Mark's screen. While we're sending that out, let's take a look at the left side of the screen, which shows us all of the band activity, and the right side of the screen, which shows us all of the beacons from stations we've heard. The center of the screen is what's happening on the frequency you're actually on. As the software is still in development, I can imagine there's going to be some GUI improvements on the way. Now, we're not limited to pre-formatted messages with FT8 Call. We can also have what would be called a free text chat in FT8. The only difference is we can type out the whole message and send it off. We don't have the text limitation as we do in SHTF. This means you can actually have a real QSO, keyboard-to-keyboard chat with an operator on the other side of the world. You can also use FT8 Call to send messages to stations you can't hear through stations you can. Perhaps now you're starting to understand why I call FT8 Call a utility mode. Certainly if your goal in amateur radio is to put an award on the wall, then certainly SHTF and FT8 is a very good solution for that. However, if you actually want to send out some useful information to operators around the globe, FT8 Call might be a better solution for doing just that. So in the QSO I'm having with Mark right now, we're actually simply having a nice chit-chat. So let's consider for a moment what we're actually doing here. We have a less than optimal station out in the field trying to get out a bit of critical information. That station now has a utility or tool to work with which is purpose-built for weak signal field communications. Now, we're not going to be sending out images or large ebooks or things like that, but we can use this efficient mode to send out critical tactical information. We might also use this system for allowing a family member to simply watch our progress on an off-grid adventure. Anyway, we need tools designed for low-power communications, helping us to extend the run times of our stations when we're out in the field. I would say FT8 Call is purpose-built for this task. So we see Mark has sent the information about his station that I asked for. As you can see, FT8 Call is not limited to simply filling out lines in a logbook for your contest. It's actually useful for having a real chat. From the X Days off-grid experiment, I would say FT8 Call is an absolute success. I had planned to send out my sit reps with WinLink, but I couldn't get it working in time on the Raspberry Pi. Now, it may not have been fair, but we threw FT8 Call into the fire. What came out at the other side was actually pretty awesome. So the bottom line, even if you don't agree, FT8 Call is a new utility mode purpose-built for that weak signal portable digital operator in the field. Now, while I was up in Lapland, I received lots of questions from you all about the station. So let's go through some of those. One of those questions was, why use the Raspberry Pi? Well, the simple answer is interoperability. I don't want to connect to a computer. I want to connect to my radio or my communication system. And I want to do that with whatever device I choose. It might be a mobile phone, it might be a tablet or a laptop. But I always want the user experience to be exactly the same. So the Raspberry Pi and the FT891 are an integrated system working together. Another question I received was, how much power was I running with FT8 Call? Well, for digital communications I used 20 watts, and for SSB I used 50 watts, but that's only part of the answer. I also put the Chameleon MCOM3 portable in a sloping V configuration with one leg pointing to north and the other leg pointing to south by southwest. An extremely popular question coming in was, why on earth did I carry 7 liters of water on the trailer rather than simply camping near a lake or a river or stream? Well, first of all, we need to look at the mission. What's the point of the expedition? And the point of the expedition was effective field communications, not camping, not survival. With that said, the best spots for HF radio are usually the worst spots for camping. So I made the conscious decision to carry the water I needed for hiking in and hiking out, and the water I needed for sustaining myself while I was there. Not washing up or having a shower for 3 days wouldn't kill me. Now, I think one of the most important questions coming in was, how did my solar generator and DIY battery pack perform? Well, guys, actually better than expected. Full sunlight was often a commodity. Most of the time I was up there, it was either cloudy or cloudy and raining. Whenever it wasn't raining, I would put the solar panels out. When it was raining, I pulled them back inside the tent. And even with doing this tango dance with the weather god, I was able to power my station for 3 days in the field. My station ran out of power on the 3rd day. That was Thursday morning. Naturally, that's not the end of the story. There's a reason we call it the solar-powered field station. I was able to get the station back up and running, batteries charged, by Thursday afternoon before heading out. My point with this is, a station without renewable energy becomes a boat anchor when the batteries are dead. When the batteries of this station are dead, weather permitting, we simply recharge them. Now, there is something I would do differently with the DIY lithium iron phosphate pack, and that's upgrade from 10 amp hours to 20 amp hours for critical field communications. There was also lots of interest in the teepee tent I use. It's a Nord tent, TP6 from Norway. It's a teepee, a ground sheet, and the inner tent, as well as wood stove. I think I've made a video about it. If I haven't, I should. The station, as you see it here, took about 20 minutes to set up, an additional 10 minutes for the solar panels and HF station. I didn't have to deploy the wood stove because it hovered just above freezing overnight. That was the coldest temperatures I had. I was also asked about condensation inside the teepee, but it really wasn't a problem because we have the inner tent and I deployed it for this trip. If you don't know how the inner tent works, it provides a layer between you and the outer shell of the teepee. It's also compatible with the wood stove for winter deployment. I was also asked why I decided to use a jet boil and what was the brand of the dehydrated food I used. For the jet boil, it was a pretty simple answer. It's simply lighter than an axe. Also, with the potential for forest fires in Scandinavia this year, open fires were discouraged. With these considerations in mind, the jet boil was the lightest, most efficient way to prepare food and water in the field. My dehydrated food comes from a company called Summit to Eat. Now, I'm sorry, I've been asked about North American distributors, but I haven't been able to find any. Now, the reason I chose this brand over Mountain House or MREs or other products like that was the simple fact that it's all natural, no preservatives, no chemicals, nothing. That may sound crazy, but what I put in my body is extremely important to me. I use the jet boil to prepare 3 cups of coffee each day, plus 2 meals. Regarding the jet boil's fuel consumption, I think in the end I actually took too much fuel with me. I took 1 small canister and 1 large canister just in case. When I arrived back home, the small canister wasn't depleted yet and the large canister wasn't touched. Based on that, I think for rapid deployment with a finite deployment time, the jet boil is quite okay. There really are no words to describe this moment as I sat outside the teepee tent with my radio, so I'm going to be quiet and simply let you enjoy the scene. Do you guys remember last year when we started talking about the solar-powered field station? We started talking about shelter, we started talking about heat, we started talking about weight, rapid deployment, radio gear, and here we are, just over a year later, and it's being deployed. I mean, it's real, here it is, and we have it out in the field. There's definitely work to be done, but I mean, the core of the solar-powered field station is there. So, early Thursday evening, I packed up and started heading back to my pickup point. I think there's a few things we can discuss while you watch this time lapse of my hike. The first point is weak signal digital comms is an important pillar in the amateur radio community. I really don't like hearing people say we don't need another weak signal mode, when I've proven in this video the importance of weak signal portable communications. Another point passively made in this video is, if you don't need it, leave it at home. This field station weighs less than my dog, and it can be deployed anywhere, including the camping gear, anywhere you can reach on foot. It's important to understand radio operators and how they think. As I mentioned in the video, the perfect place for camping is probably the worst place for radio and vice versa. The radio operator is always searching for that perfect place to make the most effective communications he or she can. One of the biggest problems I see in amateur radio today is everyone in large groups and cliques doing exactly the same thing. As radio operators, we seriously need to dare to do things differently. Certainly we're going to fail from time to time, but if we're all doing exactly the same thing and are afraid to try new things, we'll never grow as a ham radio community. For those of you inspired by what I'm doing and hoping to get out in the field yourselves, haters are going to hate regardless. The easiest way to take that energy away from the haters is to simply document the things and activities we're passionate about. This provides a foundation for newcomers to amateur field communications and takes away the voice of the haters. Next, never assume something's not possible. I mean, test it out, try it out, and prove to yourself that it is or it isn't. Amateur radio is all about experimentation. It doesn't matter if it's batteries or solar panels or building your own CW key. So explore the possibilities. Finally, guys, I can't tell you how important it is to actually share the journey. I know not everyone wants to put themselves out there, but it's important we show the ham radio community that the off-grid operator, the field radio operator, or the operator using ham radio as a utility isn't in the minority. Alright, so it's about time to start closing down this video. A couple of things I want you to do for me. Let me know what you thought about this video, about the field station, and what I'm trying to achieve here. The other thing is simple. Please share the heck out of this video. In the end, there's no reason to put so much effort into making videos like this if people don't get to see them. So please share this video. And that brings us to the end of the video, guys. Look, a special shout out to all of my channel supporters. It doesn't matter if you're throwing a buck in the tip jar or if you're sharing my content. Each and every one of you is incredibly important and I appreciate it. Alright guys, rock and roll. Thanks for watching. Ciao.